Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. My guest today is Paul Hanna. How are you today?
Hey man, I'm great. I'm great. I'm great, Clayton. There, that's how that sentence is supposed to be structured. We'll just start out with some humors.
He's late.
I'm great for a very important great date.
Paul Hanna. We discovered each other because, well, for many different reasons. But number one, I have started writing some things and I need to put some things together. But as I was doing some research on what I'm working on, I found this book.
It's called.
Show Drumming, an expert's guide to theater and touring. If you're interested in a career as a drummer in musical theater, this is the book that you need to buy. And it's written by this man here. First of all, tell me why you decided to write this book.
I wrote this book. It started originally as a de-stressing from years and years of touring and as a memoir. It basically happened during the pandemic. So I'm living out COVID, hanging out in Durham, North Carolina. My wife is keeping us alive with online lessons. And I just started writing because I'd been on the road a long, long time and had a lot of experiences. And one of the things about the road is you're constantly moving, you're constantly busy. And that's actually a great way to run away from your feelings and experiences. Like you're just busy all the time. So it's just like you don't have to process the stuff. So sitting down and writing the book was part of like clearing my head, kind of documenting what I'd done, experiences that I had. So it was really began as like just a therapeutical exercise for me. And then as I'm writing it, I realized, I just need to take out some of this clutter. And I've got an interesting book talking about the craft of playing theater, which is, I hadn't seen any books on this. It's not a really common world that's talked about in academia. And ever since Vegas basically was killed by the hotel industry in the late 80s, the hotel strike really destroyed the entire town. That was where this type of presentation was king. Like this was entertainment. And if you look at Broadway, Broadway is really to me like a Vegas show combining a production show versus and a star act. Like in Vegas growing up as a kid, you would see the production shows like the Tropicana, Folie Bergère, or Casino de Paris at the Dunes that my dad played for. And then you'd have the star acts with people coming through. And so, it dawned on me as I was writing the book that this is really the only art form that really resembles what I grew up with, the music business that I saw. And so it's kind of interesting that I ended up doing a lot of theater because it's all tied into my life ever since I started playing drums when I was 10 and really playing professionally and stuff like that. So I wanted to write as I figured out like, hey, this is going to be a good way of educating people because I learned via the apprentice system. Like I would go with my dad, who was an arranger, and he wrote for everybody who came through Vegas. I would go to the rehearsals and sit over the shoulder of the drummer. Well, Dad wrote for Diana Ross, so I'm sitting over Mel Brown's shoulder, watching him play the book, asking him questions. I'm over at the percussionist, asking him like why they set up that way. And there's a number of just tremendous players in Vegas when I grew up, And Mark Barnett was a percussionist with Spike Jones. And I'm talking to Mark, like why he set up. So Mark is like teaching me how to think about setting up stuff by looking at the music, when I'm like 13 or 14 years old. So I studied the apprentice system, which doesn't really exist anymore. And I learned my craft from the old guys. Now I'm the old guy, and it's my job to pass the knowledge on to the generations that come after us, because that's how music works, right? It's literally, a tradition that's handed down. Like you listen to the way I play, you can tell who I come from, who I listen to, who I was influenced by. I sound like myself, but you can hear the influences. And then it's my job to pass on experiences that I've had to pave the way for the future generations. And a lot of the stuff that I have in the book is sort of cautionary tales about my experiences or mishaps. A lot of guys don't share those because they're embarrassed by them or they figure it's going to damage their career. I think that's the best way to educate people, is to be honest about your experiences and let them know so that then you can take whatever happened to you and give it larger value. This can be an education for the people after me so they don't have to make the same mistakes or have this type of experience.
So let's talk about Vegas.
Okay.
You were born in Vegas. Now, you said that you were born and raised there, and there was a hotel strike in the late 80s. Tell me what it was like growing up there prior to that, and what the strike was all about, and what it did to change things in that city.
You bet. So I was born in 65. My dad had arrived in Vegas in 1957. He was from Idaho and he was originally on his way to Los Angeles, but he stopped in Vegas and he had a trio gig at the Thunderbird. So he started working like the minute he hit town and basically never left. And my sister was born before I was. And then, so in the mid 60s, I was born literally in the front seat of the Studebaker after the second show at the Dunes. Okay. So dad goes and plays the second show at the Dunes and no cell phones, right? It's like, it's 1965, guys. We're lucky we got like landlines, right? So he comes racing home after the show, tosses mom in the front seat. They drive to Sunrise Hospital, which is still there. And I was in a hurry to get there. I popped out in the front seat of a Studebaker in the parking lot of the hospital. So they put me in the isolation booth. So literally I was in a drum booth when I was born, right? Because I was born out in the world, right? And they were still doing above ground nuclear testing at that time. So who knew if I was going to be a Godzilla baby or what? So anyway, that's the story of my birth. I was literally born in a car. So being on the road makes perfect. Growing up there in the 70s, the mob ran Vegas. And it was a wonderful town for musicians because the mob loved music. They respected artists. You know, they never reneged on a contract. Every contracts were handshakes, honor, respect. Every once in a while, somebody had blown up in the parking lot of Tony Roma's rib joint or end up in a 55-gallon drum that they're now pulling out of Lake Mead. But basically, if you weren't a problem to them, competition-wise, you had no problem, particularly as an artist. And they kept street crime low because that cut into their money, right? So it was safe. And it was like a Midwestern town that just happened to have casinos, hookers, and gambling. So it was really a small town. Every hotel had a orchestra, like a big band plus strings. Lots of times, you know, French horns, just like really big orchestrations because that's what the music of the day called. You know, it was still a lot of jazz, rock and roll was emerging, but there was a lot of use for musicians. So the guys from the road bands would leave the road bands and move to Vegas. You could make road money and live in Vegas, right? Like they'd be making at that time, like what, $1,500 a week on the road with Basie's band. And they would move to Vegas and they'd make $1,500 in Vegas. And you could buy a house, you could have a family. It was literally like the American dream for musicians. So what happened is in the 70s, the corporations moved in, they took over from the mob. And the corporations are more vicious than the mob. So what happened over the course of my lifetime there is we would see the bean counter start downsizing the orchestras, cutting the budgets for this and that in terms of music and stuff like that. So my dad was no longer in the house band at the Dunes, so he made a living as an arranger, writing for everybody who came through town, as I said before. The greatest musicians in Vegas would be in the relief bands, and the relief band would play a different hotel every night. So the show is running 7 nights a week. So on Monday, they'd play the Tropicana, so the Tropicana band could have a night off. On Tuesday, they'd be at the Sahara. On Wednesday, they'd be at Caesars. Thursday, at the Flamingo, something like that. So they'd be playing a different production show or star act every night of the week. So these guys were insane readers, right? And just really, those guys were in the relief bands. And I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think there were like 3 relief bands at one time during the heyday. So a lot of the guys that were my mentors, Roger Rampton was in one of the relief bands. And Roger, whose son Kenny is the great trumpet player with Wynton, and his elder son Dale is a demon jazz vibes player, a great percussionist. So like, though that was the generation that I grew up in, the sons and daughters of those guys. And so tons of great players, music all over the place. Like the musicians would play, do the shows. They would have jazz gigs on the side, trios, quartets. Carl Fontana was there. You could go to the Four Queens and watch Carl Fontana playing, Santo Savino's playing drums. And Carl's just like, you know, you're just like, holy smoke. So it was just like the Garden of Eden for learning to play the craft because I was learning from the guys that invented the music. My drum teacher, Jerry Gilgore, was from Philly. He'd played with Dizzy. He'd been the house drummer on the Jack Parr show in New York with Johnny Frost was the lead player. Jerry was the drummer. I learned from him in Vegas. He was out there. Tommy Check, who was an absolute phenomenal drummer. My dad did 3 charts for Barbra Streisand for the Live at the Forum record, and Tommy was the drummer. They flew him from Vegas to LA. I didn't know that Tommy was the drummer until my dad's funeral when Tommy got up to talk. All of these great players on all these instruments. We had woodwind doublers out the wing wang, guys who could play oboe, stand up and play kill and tenor. So it was really a wonderful place to grow up because I could learn my craft from these guys. And a lot of the early rock and roll guys, they had experience with that. So, everything was happening. Funk, fusion, like all this stuff. All the musicians were really interested in different kinds of things, as well as orchestral stuff. Like there was orchestras. So I was playing the Civic Symphony when I was like 15. I ended up playing almost more literature in the Civic Symphony than I did when I went to New England Conservatory and was paying a gazillion bucks, right? Like I had a wonderful training ground as an orchestral player. I was playing in big bands. I was playing, small group jazz. We were doing experimental thing. My dad wrote aleatoric music. Like he wrote these things for percussion ensemble and tape. So Vegas was just this creative hotbed. And it stayed that way until I went away to college. And in the late 80s, there was a hotel strike. What happened is the hotels wanted to bring in taped music. And Siegfried and Roy was one of the first acts to want to bring in tape music, right? And Steve Wynn wanted to save money. So it's just like, oh yeah, we'll just use tape. Forget about the band, right? So Musicians Union goes on strike. It's a long strike. It's ugly. In the end, the hotels had more power than the musicians. They broke the back of the Musicians Union. And that was basically the death of the Vegas that I grew up in. So after that, minimal union work, all the bands shrunk. Many of my heroes, Tommy Check got a real estate license. George Durkin, who was my last teacher, who'd gone to New England to study with Vic, just an unbelievably great percussionist, went into real estate. All the copyists moved to LA, so my dad would be writing arrangements. He'd have to learn to do finale because there were no decent copyists left in Vegas. So the strike really broke the back. And that also coincided with my graduating. I went to NEC and then I went to Hart. I got my artist diploma from Al Lepak. I wanted to be a studio player in LA because in my dad's lexicon, they were the greatest players on earth. So that's what I wanted to do, make dad proud. So I went and studied with Lepak because all the LA Mafia were Connecticut guys. Come out of Lepak's studio. Emil Richards, Larry Bunker, Joe Picaro, all those guys were Connecticut guys. So I went and studied with Lepak. I come out, I'm 100% ready for a world that no longer exists. And the Vegas strike has destroyed my fallback, which is like, well, if I can't get things happening, I'll always move back to Vegas. Boom, Vegas blows up. So there I am, out of school without a net. And here comes touring.
Well, let's go back a little bit. You studied with Vic Firth and Alan Dawson. How do you think those lessons influenced your career and your style?
Both of those guys were just great players and great educators. Alan had this whole system of developing technical acumen on the drums, but it was always framed within a musical context. Anybody who studied with Alan will play musically because that's how he taught. You would do technical exercises, but you'd have to sing the head from a standard while you're playing them, right? So you would play 4 bars at a time, singing the tune, and then you'd sit and sing the next 4 bars and you play the coordination exercise. It's a musical context. You would end up, sometimes at the end of the lessons, we'd play tunes. He'd play vibes. He was a great jazz vibes player. And you'd trade. So you're like making music, you're having a conversation, and it's always within a musical context. Even the ritual, the chop building exercise that he did, which to me is still to this day the greatest technical hand builder maintenance routine that you can do. You would play like a samba pattern, then everything is all the chop building stuff over the top. And then you'd play it on the kit with brushes. Like Alan was like, yeah, man, sticks aren't enough. You're going to play this with brushes. And my friend Jun Saito, the great drummer in Japan, has a video of a clinic that Alan gave in Japan because Jun went to Berkeley and studied with Alan when Alan was teaching at Berkeley. But when I was studying with Alan, he was just teaching at his house. So you take the bus out to his house. But he's got a video of Alan playing the ritual with brushes. And it's just like, you just watch the man play. You're like, musical context. Vic, unbelievable. Nobody, to me, still the world's greatest timpanist. He played timpani. He was a big band drummer before he got the job in a BSO. He plays in the BSO just like a big band drummer. He sets up the band. Boom, do, do, pa, pa. Like, it's that same aesthetic. And the man had no self-doubt, no lack of confidence. He was just a walking, he was Vic Firth 100% all the time, which is amazing if you don't really know who you are or you're not really confident in yourself. To stand in a room with this guy who's 100% himself at all time is just like, so watching him be himself was a lesson in and of itself. And studying with him was just awesome. Like, I worked my butt off, but he really delivered for me. Some other guys didn't get along with him. They had problems with him. I never had any of those issues, but I worked my butt off for him because he just inspired this desire to play really well. So he was a fantastic teacher for mallets, all that stuff. I really developed my skills as an orchestral player, which carry over into touring, right? Funny Girl, I got a bunch of timpani in the show. I got mallet parts, and the same thing in a lot of other shows. American in Paris. I've done a lot of combined books where I've needed to play timpani, mallets, and drum kit. Exactly what I was doing when I was 13, 14 in Vegas, right? We didn't have enough percussionists at the Civic Symphony. I'd play multiple parts all the time. Play tambourine with my foot while I'm playing snare drum and covering the triangle and the bass drum and doing all this stuff. I was literally training for theater way back then with no idea that that was where I was going to end up. So studying with Vic and Alan, they gave me the ability to play like anything, mallets, timpani. Alan was great for musical framing for death. Studying with Lepak was awesome because he had a book about drum set orchestration. Like, you play this one line and you orchestrate it like 12 different ways on the kit. So you turn the page, another line, here's all these different things. Genius at that. Leap was also great for ear training. Vic didn't do anything with ear training because Vic had great ears. I had good enough ears. So we didn't deal that. Lepak was a theory teacher. You had to sing every interval you had to play in his etudes before he'd let you play them. It's just like, man. So I had, a lot of the technical facility I developed with Vic and the attitude and then the refinements of intonation and stuff with Lepak, as well as his mallet concerto, which I played. Just an awesome piece written to feature mallets. He wrote it for Emo Richards, the mallet god. So studying with those guys, and then also I studied with Dave Carey, the great New York session player. When I was going to Hart, I took some lessons on the side with Dave. Dave was the greatest reader I ever saw, except for maybe Roger Rampton. Dave flopped a fake book up on the vibes. He says, first thing you need to know about vibraphone is arrangers don't know how to write for it. They think it's a piano. Learn to play out of piano fake books. And he starts reading this thing. And I'm like, okay, I love mallets, but I don't know if I love them this much, and I'm playing drum set with my right hand and bells with my left, and he looks at me and he goes, what are you messing with mallets for? You play drum set like that. And I was like, what? He was like the first guy to give me permission to turn more towards the drums, which is what I'd always wanted to do. I didn't want to learn to play percussion. Dad made me do it. From a practical point of view, again, 12 years old, in Vegas, if the act brings a drummer, you're out of work. If you can play the percussion chair, you keep working. So you're going to learn to play mallets. You're going to learn to play timpani. And I fought him all the way because all I ever wanted to play was drums. But studying percussion made me a much better drummer. It makes you so aware of the sound. You end up playing music. You're playing melodic things on the mallets. So you start to think more melodically. So it influences your drumming, your choice of fills, your techniques on the cymbals, the way you balance the voices of the kit. Studying percussion makes you much more in tune with those things. Studying percussion, you got to play all these avant-garde septuplets and quintuplets. And you look at the black page, you're like, oh yeah, this looks like a snare drum etude, just broken up on the drums, And so basically that's kind of what it is. So that background, I have never had to read anything Broadway, professionally, anywhere near the stuff I had to read when I was in college. So it's just like everything else has been easier. It's like over-prepared, right? It's like you train like, Usain Bolt, but you don't have to run at the Olympics. You can run so fast, like everything else, everything you do in your life, you're just kind of like moderately jogging. You're like, yeah, man, I got it. So that over-preparing was a big part of training with those guys. That was the funny thing is like the whole idea of actually being over-prepared for what you're going to do ran through, so much of my training. And it's really interesting like that. And it's definitely helped me to have the diversity like that. It does take a lot of time to develop the ability to play those things. That's why a lot of guys don't do them both, is because it really takes an enormous amount of time to develop the skill sets. But I was, like I said, really ambitious as a kid. And one of the best ways to motivate me was telling me something couldn't be done.
Mm.
And the guys in Vegas said, yeah, you can't be a great percussionist and a great drummer. I was just like, okay. That's all I needed.
Okay, let's
You know,
piggyback on that for a quick second. You know, we're gonna get into why you didn't come to New York, and you said you wanted to go to LA to be a session musician, but of course,
Yeah.
sessions. I remember this. I'm gonna say this again. I've said it on different podcasts. One of my guests, Damon Duwhite, told me that when he moved to New York in the early '80s, you know, the drum machine got on the 7 o'clock bus, and he got on the 8 o'clock bus. So, people had to deal with the drum machines in the studio scene. Of course, as we know, it's very diminished. And you can have a studio on the thing that I'm looking at right here, which is a
Yeah.
laptop.
Right. I never went to LA because the universe is like, which is to me is like the default whatever, I don't really go into religion. The universe works for me. Like just was like, it's provided me with everything I've ever, and trusting that has been one of the hardest skills I've had to develop as a human, particularly in this business. Cause like you got a gig till boom, and then you got nothing. Your calendar's like, boop, and I remember sitting there in college and I'm like, had like $12 in my bank account. And I had a phone bill for like $25. And I'm like, and the phone rings. And it's like a, $50 gig. I'm like, boom, I got the phone bill and I got food. Woo! So like like I charted a path for my life, right? And I was going to will my way through my entire life. And that has never once worked, and just accepting that like, yes, I have these ideas about what I want to do, and I've actually been able to manifest most of those things, but I've had to take a different route than what I might think. That's exactly what happened. So I was getting all the skills together to be an LA session player, and at that time, I had never examined why I wanted to be an LA session.
In the late '80s, the Vegas scene was not the same. The LA scene was not really the same as it was in the early '80s, especially with, Toto and Jeff Porcaro and all those guys doing all the great records that they did. And even, going back even further, New York was changing. Was the touring thing one of the reasons why that you decided to go on tour, because of the decreased amount of opportunities?
I wish it had been that conscious of a decision. Like, I wish it had been that carefully considered, because I didn't even realize when I got out of college that the world had changed as much. The ramifications of the Vegas strike hadn't settled in. The understanding of the changes in LA and New York and all the changes in the music business hadn't really dawned on me. I was like still thinking maybe I could get a gig on the road with the big band. I was born 20 years too late. Everything I love is like 20 years before me. And so I'm thinking I was born into that world, and the whole realization that no, the whole world has changed and you got to figure out what you're going to do. But what happened is the touring business literally dropped in my lap. Okay. I'm in my last year at Hart, and I'm subbing at the Goodspeed Opera House because I know how to do theater. I can read. Gene Bosey, who was the main drummer at Goodspeed, and then Sal Raniello was the main sub. I was the second sub at Goodspeed. So I did a whole bunch of productions at Goodspeed, going there, playing, doing basically musical theater. One day I get a call from Steve Agertelli, and he's the percussionist who's on the road with the Into the Woods tour. Steve's from New Haven. He says, hey man, I'm going to be in town. We're playing New Haven. I'm getting married. I want my parents to meet my fiance. So I need somebody to cover a couple of shows. I called Sal. Sal said it's too much work. Call the young guy. And he gave me your number. So would you be interested? I'm like, yeah, sure. So he sends me the book for Into the Woods, and I like shed the stuffing out of this thing because I was just obsessive. Like that's how you practice. You prepared just beyond, it was almost like a pathological thing, which I learned later is a great defense mechanism, right? Because you prepare so that you don't make mistakes. You don't have to deal with people not liking you or getting fired. it's this weird mix of wanting to be good, but also with a little bit of a pathological risk to it. So I prep the show, I go in and play the show, and it was really like combat conditions, man. The guy who was the conductor on the show was just a vicious guy. And I made like one small error. You had to trigger stuff in, there was a DX7 running an Akai S950 sampler. So there's a bunch of sound cues in the book. Baby cries, the feeding the objects, the milky white, the cow's death, all that stuff is in the percussion book. They had 2 sound guys on Broadway. So on the road, sound cues, the percussion book, right? So it's not enough to have to play all the percussion stuff. I got sound cues too. So there's one line, give me your baby. And on the recording, the spacing was like this. And so I hit the key like I'd trained myself, and I had jumped the cue from the conductor, and so he yells at me, wait, bro, with me. And I'm just like, okay, I just lost the gig. I want to go home. And so it was a hysterical introduction to like kind of maniacal Broadway conductors. The thing was, I did such a solid job on it that when Steve left the tour a couple months later, I was the easy guy. They called me up. I had the tour. So I literally graduated from Hart in like May, and end of October, I was in San Francisco on the road with Into the Woods.
Wow.
It literally just fell in my lap. However, I did really prepare. So the opportunity was effortless, but all the years of preparation, see, that's the story. Like everybody's like, oh, that was easy. It's like, yeah, the opportunity fell in my lap, but I had spent years preparing to be able to meet the opportunity. So you got to make sure you do your homework, and then when the opportunity arises that you're prepared for it. So that's what happened with Into the Woods. So I did the Into the Woods tour, and then I was back in Connecticut, and my wife and I, she's my girlfriend at the time, we got married in 91. We moved a little closer to New York because I thought, oh, doing the Into the Woods tour will give me some connections into New York. Nothing. Didn't give me a single connection in New York. All it did was connect me with other touring shows, and working with an MD I did not like at all. I was like, great. So I was working around Connecticut, again, doing stuff at good speed, and I got the call from Mel Rodman to do the Cats tour. So he's like, go into New York, watch Ron Tierno play the book, and see if you can handle this. And I'm looking at like, of course, confident Paul at 25 is like, I can handle anything. But okay, so I'll jump through the, so I call Ron, make it, we go to watch him at the Winter Garden, and Ron is just the greatest cat, man. Nice cat, shows me what's happening. And I'm excited. I'm like, wow, this is great. So I call Mel back. I'm like, yeah, I can do this. So I joined that tour in like March of 92 in Providence. And I do that until like May of 93. So I was out with Cats National 4 for 15 months as the drummer. And here's the thing. I was making $1,800 a week just playing drum.
Back then.
Yeah, man. So I'm like, okay. So I was paying off credit card debt. I was paying off school debt. I was like, man, this is great. And Gene Roma was the drummer, right? Gene and Janet, husband and wife. Janet was usually a conductor or an associate, and Gene was the drummer. So Gene is talking to me about the heyday in the 70s when he and Janet were on the road. They were making like $5,000 a week, like doing Andrew Lloyd Webber show. So I was like, okay, there's some fat dollars in this industry. This is like a really good way to make a living. So even at like 25, 26, I was like, oh, it's got a pension. I'm like, wow. Oh, it's got this. Oh, it's got this. I was like, this is pretty good. So that was the debut into the touring world. So I did those. Then there were problems on the Cats tour. Cats National 4 was sort of notorious for being a killer tour. There were always problems. There were always personnel conflicts. There was all sorts of mental warfare going on. There's a number of Cats 4 survivors who joke about what the hell is it about this show that turns people into maniacal creatures, right? So what happened was there were issues for me within the band, with a couple of the guys in the band. And it just turned into emotional warfare, just total environment that I wanted to avoid. When I was at NEC, I saw the dynamics in the BSO percussion section. And I saw some people who were really jealous of Vic, and there was a lot of acrimoniousness. And I was just like, man, I can't imagine going to work with somebody I don't like every day. I don't want to go into classical music. I don't want to be an orchestral player. So I show up on the touring gig and I have the same dynamic. So, it was really interesting. I'm forever indebted to my enemies on that tour because they pointed out to me that I was way too vulnerable to the opinions of others.
Mm.
What a great gift these guys gave me. Like, I had to make sure, had to learn to make sure that my concept of myself was based on me, not on externals. And I had been conditioned to believe that you find your place in the world based upon your external accomplishments. And the more you accomplish, the better you feel about yourself, right? Great mythological belief system that we're indoctrinated into as musicians. And then you talk to all your buddies who won the Grammy Awards, and they're like, yeah, I still got, the car broke down yesterday. I still got to take out the trash. Yeah, becoming great didn't change anything. So then I was like 30 going like, well, crap. My whole motivation for like becoming great as a player was to fill that emptiness inside that comes from whatever psychological damage was done to you growing up. So it was a great gift from those guys. And at the same time, they were New Yorkers, and that was the death knell for New York. I was like, I'm never moving to that damn town if people like that work there. So that was it. I'm never going to Broadway. If I got to work with, like that, I'm not going. So I stayed in Connecticut and freelance. I had a jazz trio, made records, and played orchestral things, biker bars with people getting beat up in the parking lot. I'd go from one day playing with the Bridgeport Symphony, playing the Planets. The next day, I'm in chicken wire cage with beer bottle, and then I'm playing some society wedding. So I was doing all the freelance stuff and doing a bunch of original projects, my fusion band, playing with big bands and doing all sorts of stuff for those 10 years. And that's what that 10-year hold was like. Then we got tired of the Northeast, moved to Florida. And again, the road just dropped in my lap with the go on the road with Starlight Express. Again, referred by an old friend of mine from Hart, Ed Fast. Contractor called Ed. He didn't want to do it. So the guy called me. That's how I got back into touring. However, the money when I got back to touring was half of what it had been in 93. The Starlight Express tour was like $1,000 a week.
So before you go on, I have this inflation calculator. 1983 would be $38.96 now.
Yeah.
That's what it should be.
That's what it should be if it was just like frozen, right?
Right.
Like that stuff that Robert Reich talks about with there's no income growth for most people.
Yes, it is half.
Not even
less
half.
than that.
Yeah. So, I mean, in order to get back to the bread I was making on Cats, like a number of the tours with the doubles and everything, they came close. Funny Girl's the best gig I've done in a long, long time. It's a set contract. We've got doubles. We've got overages. Yes. I'm like, this is great. I wish this would never end, man. I love playing the show, but I love getting the checks too. I mean, it's a combination of the two. I'm not just a mercenary, but the show is great. So that's how I ended up with that stuff. And again, like you'd asked about all the different types of gigs that I did. Yeah, it's like, I think the only thing I really haven't done is either touring with a real serious act, like a rock tour or major film score work. But pretty much everything else, I think I've at least done at least a couple of times.
I subbed for Bill Lanham at the revival of Cats in 2016. And I had a little stint playing Cats again last summer in the show Cats, the Jellicle Ball.
Yeah.
So I had to revisit certain songs, and I realized that playing skimble shanks can really drive you crazy. So maybe that's the reason why you're like, I can't do this Cats thing. And people wind up, that whole Cats thing that people, I guess, got, had problems with, and Mr. Mistopheles for 5,000 times.
The funny thing is, when I came back, so I did I played at this point because I did another tour. I did the Troika tour and right after the pandemic, right? So I did another 2 years of Cats. So I got cranked over 1,000 performances in the bank of that thing.
Mm.
And I really enjoy playing the drum book from Cats because you get all your major food groups. You get to play some big band, you get to play some rock, you get to play some
disco,
funky stuff, you get to play some disco, you get to play odd times because it's an Andrew Lloyd Webber show. We can't have a show without some random odd times in there. So I'd never really disliked, playing the music because, you got to play your major food groups, and It was interesting to see how the stuff had changed, though, because Mistopheles was very much different than it was when I played it in '93. It had a slower section and really cool horn writing that was just gone in the modern versions of the stuff. And also, I had to play the cats who were on V drums because they didn't want to haul around. They wanted to save bread. They didn't want to haul around the drum house and drum kit. So I did the whole thing on rubber drums. But fortunately, those rubber drums, all respect for Roland, the electronic drums, I carry them with me in my rehearsal road box on Funny Girl so I can create and record with them while I'm on the road. And when I recorded my album this year in LA, I used the V drums on a couple of tunes because I wanted to have a hybrid kit. I wanted to have a drum set with timbales, and then I wanted to have some other sounds available. So I recorded with the V drums and did some sound replacement. It worked out great. But there's a video up on YouTube, V drums saved the show. We were in Kansas City, and one of the modules in the sound rack went belly up on sound guys. They couldn't get the drum mics out into the system. So we were literally 20 minutes from canceling the opening show in Kansas City. When I went to the sound guy, I said, "Hey, Mark, if I give you stereo outs from a set of V drums, could you run them into like one of the inputs on the keyboards and we could have some drums?" He said, "Yeah, that'll work." So I ran, got my road case, set up my V drums. We plugged them in, and I did the opening show in Kansas City with V drums. And then they couldn't get the part for Wednesday. So I did the Wednesday show with V drums. 5,000 seats, 2 performances, all the people that would have been canceled. I just happened to have my V drums with me, and we saved the show. So again, you never know when stuff you've done is going to set you up for something. It makes a great road story, man.
Roland V drum saved the day.
Exactly.
You were born 1 year before me. Yeah, probably have the same influences. I'm just curious, what types of music were you listening to in, say, before we got on the show, we talked about the Warriors and what were you into in the '70s musically?
The thing about growing up the son of my father, an arranger, is his record collection was astonishing, right? Like I could listen to the Rite of Spring, right? The BSO doing the Rite of Spring. There's Neil Hefti, Count Basie record right next to that. Emerson, Lake and Palmer right next to that. Donna Fargo country album next to that. My Funny Valentine, right? Miles, and my dad played me that record. And he's like, "This is the day that changed small group jazz forever. Listen to the way that this is going, And I had lessons with Tommy Check where I'd just go to his house and he'd play records for me and we'd listen to stuff. So I had this incredible upbringing of being exposed to all this music, like choral music. My mom was an organist in the church, so I'd go. There was no childcare, right? So childcare turns into you're turning pages on the organ bench from like 7 turning Bach. But I get exposed to great choral music and great organ pieces and symphonic pieces. And again, Dad's listening to like George Crumb madrigals, and he was really into Yusachevsky and electronic music. He did this piece called Marble Game that won a high fidelity contest in the 70s. And he built his own spring reverb units and stuff. It was my first recording. I walked out when I was like 5 years old or whatever and asked him a question or something. And it's in the recording. He ran me through some processing. So I'm looking back, I'm like, he was into all this really diverse stuff. So I literally could listen to practically anything. We had Rush, so I'm listening to Neil Peart. We got Fix, 3 quartets. We got the Friends album. We've got Weather Report. We've got great big bands. You can hear Mel Lewis's big band. We went to see them play. I went to see Buddy's band and play late at night, in Vegas in one of the casinos. There was so much music happening live and so much that we could access through the records that I really got to listen to everything. And so I think that's why I'm not a snob about music, is because I was exposed to so many varieties of it. And they were all treated equally. They all had their merits. It's just a matter of what you were looking for.
Usually when I run into people that come out of music schools, they come out jazz snobs. They're like, there's only one kind of music and it's everything that's jazz prior to 1970. Right. I don't want to hear anything else. Very cool.
Yeah, I dodged the bullet on that. And it actually created more problems for me when I was in school. Like at NEC, I was so psyched to get into the conservatory, and I fought to study with Vic, because I wanted to study. I've always had the good fortune of studying with great teachers and great masters, and it's just like martial arts. If you want to get the style, you go as close to the master as possible, because
Mm.
everything, and when you study with descendants, everything gets watered down. We had American Taekwondo, which really wasn't based on Korean Taekwondo. When I found a real Korean Taekwondo teacher, it was like, wait, this is the same art? I'm like, how did,
Mm.
and so that happens with the musical stuff too. So that's why I feel privileged as, having the honor of studying with these guys. You get the real Vic, you get the real Alan, you learn the ritual. The book that the Berkeley guy put out, had some of the stickings changed in the ritual. And I was like, no, you need the real stickings because you had to figure things out, with Alan, how to get from this sticking to that sticking, which makes you a better player. If you reverse the stickings, it spoon feeds and it doesn't create the same issues. So once again, here it is just one guy removed, a distillation of what you would learn if you went to the source.
That kind of echoes a lot of things some of the older musicians that are on the podcast say when I talk about people that want to play on Broadway. They tend to put up videos of themselves playing shows, which are the derivatives of the original music where it came from. Instead of playing Hamilton, you should go listen to some actual hip hop that inspired Lin-Manuel Miranda to write Hamilton. You want to play, I don't know, anything, even the shows that I've done, like, Lady Day at MC's Bar and Grill, or even Memphis had a bunch of different styles. Go and play the actual music that it came from. Go to the source material. That's, the same thing that you're talking about as far as learning from the masters. You learn from the originals. But I want to get into your book again, Show Drumming, An
Okay.
Expert's Guide to Theater and Touring, which you should buy, by the way. Evita, Jesus Christ Superstar, 42nd Street, Spamalot, 101 Dalmatians, Wicked, Bring It On, The Addams Family, West Side Story, Wizard of Oz, again, Funny Girl. Any advice? First of all, shows, what do you think is the most difficult one that you did and why?
One of the reasons why there's a section in the book, I wanted to have musical examples from West Side, talking about how I interpreted them, how I think really the approach works. The estate wouldn't go for it, so to avoid getting my pantsuit off, I talk about it. So I'm assuming that you can get a hold of the book and maybe reference the stuff that I'm talking about in that section of West Side. Because West Side's a really difficult book as a drummer because you have to be an orchestral percussionist and a hell of a big band guy at the same time. You also have to know how to interpret the score. So those are the challenges of West Side. Wicked, when I played it in 2010, the book was like you had to play the book. You had to play the grooves as they were written. Everything was really written out. The whole flying monkey thing on the pad in the overture, there was like some bass drum parts underneath that you really had to nail. You couldn't really interpret these things. They wanted them played literally, right? And so for my money, Wicked was one of the first tours that came along that was absolutely dictating the parts. Like Alex, when he codified what Gary played, very much Oremus and Alex want you to play what's on the page. So that's your job. And as a jazz player, I find that really hard because I have a lot of experience playing all the source music that this is coming from. So I feel comfortable improvising within that context. But you're never sure if it's a control issue or if it's like, I just can't trust the people that are going to play this down the line. So I want to dictate it and give it as clean information as possible. Wicked was really challenging because the volumes I had to play at, I was dimpling 2-ply drum heads the day I would put them on. I'm hitting so hard. I'm using butt ends of 5Bs because they want that intensity. And I'm saying, hey, I come from the jazz tradition. We can generate tremendous intensity internally and play whisper soft. But nobody wanted to hear that from me. It was also challenging the drum booth because the roof sucked up so much sound, I would overplay the cymbals. So when I came up Wicked, I was beating the crap out of the crash cymbals to get the equivalent sound that I would get without the drum house. Threw my inner dynamics off. Jesus Christ Superstar, they had me playing V drum. However, That tour was musically one of the most rewarding tours I've ever done for the simple reason we got away with murder. We blew off the music supervisor. He would come in and tell us to do things that we collectively decided were less than optimal. So we would play them while he was there. We'd wait for him to leave, and then we'd go back to what we were doing. And Ted Neely supported that, and Corey Glover supported that. Like the whole cast, crew, like everybody loved what we were doing. So we got left alone. There were problems with the MD. He ended up getting fired. I was instrumental in that event occurring. Because I had the big mouth, right? I was in my 40s when we did that. All the rest of the guys, John Toney, Michael Mitchell, Nick Dickerson, they were all the young guys, right? So old guy, big mouth. I ended up talking to Pat Glynn at the union about the problems in the pit. These are the infractions. This is what's going on. We got to get this guy out. Finally, because the cast supported it, we got him removed. Then Michael Mitchell moved up to conducting the show, and we brought out another keyboard player to play basically what had been the conductor's book. So musically, I mean, the tour was 119 cities in 10 months. My wife and I drove the tour. We drove 68,000 miles. But the music we played every night, we played that show like we were going to die, like after the show, like that level of commitment. And these guys were some of the greatest musicians I've ever played with. And I could play like Judas's Death. I just start soloing. I'm just like blowing chops, doing the inversions of time. I'm like, jazz fusion, jazz fusion. And Corey is digging it, and he's taking longer and longer to die. Like literally, he's listening to us jam, and I'm getting like lactic acid buildup from like, bro, Corey just died up, die, Corey. And he just keeps milking it because he's digging what we're doing musically. I tell that story to some of the guys who play like, some of the really strict shows like Wicked or Hamilton, and they don't believe that I had that musical experience. I'm like, yeah, we actually got to put our own stamp on this. We got to play for real, and it worked. And that's never been the model for any show I've ever done since. We haven't been trusted at that level, except for when I did West Side Story with Michael Duff. Michael Duff, greatest MD, one of the great MDs I've ever worked for, lovely guy, lifelong friend. He trusted me to interpret the book. And when we did the production in Japan, 20-piece orchestra, and we were in a theater that was 10 Broadway stages surrounding the seating. The seating, 1,500 seats, was all on like a Lazy Susan. They would rotate around from stage to stage. So instead of having scene changes, we'd have to play music for the audience to rotate to the next stage. And the stage crew in Japan built New York. It opens up. There's a brownstone here. There's a car. There's a fence. There's another brownstone. Jock's Drugstore looked exactly like a store. Like all the details were there. It was incredible. They had little stickers on the cash register. Dude, it was the most awesome set ever. Great cast, 20-piece band. Duff and I were the only Americans, all Japanese band. And I got to play like 3 months of this show. It was just musically like Jesus Christ Superstar and West Side Story were records I listened to when I was a kid. I didn't know they were shows. I listened to the Jesus Christ Superstar Brown album, and I saw West Side Story. I heard West Side Story, then I saw the movie. I was just like, I love this, man. Xylophone part, great vibe parts, great drum parts. So I love that music, and then the universe gave me the opportunity to play it. I'm like, this is amazing. So each show has challenges, like 101 Dalmatians disappeared off the face of the earth. There's a lot of friction in the creative team. I have a lot of memories of Dennis DeYoung running down the aisle, yelling at me to play more fills. I'm just like, but I'm thinking the music doesn't call for that. But he's so used to, his guy from Styx, putting fills in these places that he wants that for me. So I'm like, okay. So that would have challenges. There's always political challenges. Each show brings with it its own challenges. Even, Funny Girl, the music supervisor, Michael Rafter, is very, very particular about tempo. And in rehearsals in New York, he would be like, okay, you guys, that was great. It started at 117, but really by the end, it was at 116. And I'm like, okay, I've never met somebody who's got that honed of a, And I found out the guy was a mathematical genius before he got into music. I'm like, oh, okay. So he's got one of those brains that's wired for that stuff. But anyway, I mean, like, so we really have to be on our game, Elaine, the MD, and myself, with the tempos, with the precision of the tempos, like, stay focused. It really, like, if you got good time to begin with, working with Rafter will lock your time in. It'll either kill you or give you really, really solid time. So that's a benefit, again, from meeting that challenge.
Well, speaking of the word challenge, being in New York City is a challenge. To be working steadily as a professional musician in New York is a challenge. There are reasons why people move to New York or move to LA, and you decided to stay on tour instead of going and settling in on either one of these cities, New York.
Yeah, Chicago, back in the old days.
Now, everything it has, I was telling my son, because we were watching something about economics, and I was telling him about Thomas Sowell. One of the quotes from Thomas Sowell is, "There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs." So, we talked about this before you got on the podcast. There's reality of theater drumming or theater. You can go to the West End, you can go to Broadway, or you can go on tour. You can, stay where you are and do regional theaters. You could stay in your city in Chicago and play. If you're a guitar player, you can play all the shows that come through a certain theater if they call you all the time. Tell the listeners and watchers about your choice in not going to New York to be on, to do the Broadway thing, and the opportunities that exist on tour. As you say in your book, Show Drumming, you're basically talking about all the things that you can do on tour. Why the touring thing and not coming to Broadway?
Well, as I said earlier, the really negative experience I had with some of the New York musicians on the Cats tour really sullied New York for me. I wasn't really comfortable with New York because it just is such a fast, intense place. I grew up in the West. Everything was slower paced, more open, so the energy of New York didn't work for me. But I began to realize that I'd been, as I was just working on the road and pursuing some of the other creative projects that I had done, in between stints on the road and on the road, I realized that a lot of the concepts I had about where I needed to go were all sort of musical mythology. Like, you could only go to New York to do this. You could only go to LA to do this. Like, I remember catching Medeski, Martin, and Wood early in their career when I was in Austin for a minute. And Medeski and I went to NEC together. My wife actually was in children's theater with him in Florida. She was Captain Hook, and he was one of the Lost Boys. Like, I mean, like, how wild is that? So anyway, I'm talking to Medeski after one of their concerts, and I'm like, well, I'd really love to do something like you're playing, And he's like, man, you can only do this in New York. And I'm like, I don't think that's true. So what I discovered through touring is that there's great musicians all over the country. There are great musicians in places that you never think there's going to be somebody who can just, like, turn your head. And touring, when you pick up locals, you meet all these people. You get to play with some monsters that you've never heard of. And you're just like, you're playing, and you like turn your head. You're like, I want to talk to that person, get their information, right? And you just like, there's a whole network of great musicians all around. So LA, when I was in 92, when I did Cats in LA, we played a month at the Schubert Theater, which is now gone. And it was all LA session musicians. The traveling band got laid off, and it was me and the keyboard players, right? So I'm playing with all the great LA session players. And I'm like, the horn player just did the Star Trek, film score that morning. She comes in to play at a matinee, and I'm looking around and I'm like, Dave Stone's playing bass. I'm like, that's Dave Stone. I'm playing Cats with Dave Stone. I was like 26. So the lead player, Stuart Blomberg, who was a great LA session cat, comes over and he says, man, you played the shit out of this, show. For a young kid, you should consider moving to LA. So after that happened, I realized that, like, I could check that box. I had proved that I was good enough to go there. And I was like, okay, that's what this has all ever been about. Going to New York has been about proving myself. LA, proving myself. So as I got older And I could see that that was my motivation for these things. I was like, that's what I want, is to prove myself. I'm like, well, how can I do that without having to go there? I was like, oh. So that became the next 30 years of my life. Because like literally, I grew up with such a critical methodology, and music school trains you to only look at what you're doing wrong. You know, it's the greatest way to take the joy out of playing is to go to a conservatory education systems, right? And so those of us who went to conservatories joke about being in recovery, right? We're finding our way back to the joy of playing, you know? So it took me until I was 50 years old to be able to listen to recordings of myself without critiquing them so much and feeling like I can't play. Like I had that level of dysfunction. So the thing about theater is that it gives you the opportunity to confront all those demons. And when you have a gig, you don't have to worry about hustling. So your brain can explore your life a little bit more. You can spend more time actually talking to your wife about things that are important. Discover that like, hey, you know, a lot of my motivations were to please my parents. What do I want? You know, and sometimes it takes a partner or a good friend, an honest friend, to call you out on those dysfunctions to make you go like, well, why is this important to you? You know, like I'm putting out a lot of music now, a lot of music I've been sitting on from years ago, back when I wasn't sure if I was good enough. I went and took lessons with Billy Ward, the great drummer, not the Black Sabbath guy, but the New York guy. And I'm going to Billy to find out if I'm good enough, right? In the first lesson, Billy says, you know, a lot of guys come to me to find out if they're good enough. And I'm like, how did he read my mind? And he's like, dude, I got to tell you, 4 days a week, I wake up wondering if I'm good enough. And I'm like, oh, no, don't tell me that. You know, and he's like, his wife at that time was a great visual artist. And she said, it's just the nature of being an artist. And I was like, oh, crap. So this doesn't ever go away. You got to learn to deal with this stuff.
When did you realize you were good enough? When you said in your 50s?
Yeah, it literally took me until about 9 years ago. Because I had always looked at it in terms of like, I'm not getting these gigs because I'm not good enough. I never looked at it as like, these gigs don't exist anymore. It has nothing to do with when you're good enough to get these gigs. They don't exist, man. It's different than what your dysfunction is telling you. So there's never enough talk in musical circles about dealing with our mental demons. I mean, we talk about performance anxiety, which to me is the gift that tells you you're expecting something that's never going to happen. Like you can't be anxious without irrational beliefs about what's going to happen. If you believe you'll be fine, then you'll never get anxious. You know, it's like, look, dude, I'm going to be fine. The universe has taken care of me my whole life. I'll be fine. So the anxiety is telling you something important. It's your friend. Most people look at like, you know, these issues as like an opponent. I used to be like that. Everything has to be overcome. You got to fight. You got to fight. It's like, no, this is your friend telling you, hey, man, you're believing stuff that's not true. If you let go of that, the anxiety settles down because it was an alarm bell about some dysfunction for you. How's that for heavy?
Say deep.
Yeah, exactly. I really believe that music is the ultimate. It's such a wonderful arena for self-discovery because every issue that you have as a person comes out your instrument. If you're arrogant, you don't leave room for other players. If you're insecure, you don't play with the commitment that instrument needs. And so it's a wonderful way to experience this and almost treat yourself as a person to become a better person. And for me, my wife has always seen the best possible version of me. And that has pulled me to become that person because she matters that much to me. That I'm willing to confront these things because that's what she needs. You know? Yeah. So anyway, the touring thing, playing the same music night after night, like if you want to meet your demons, man, you know, I'm coming up on 500 performances of Funny Girl, right? If you had to play that bell 500 times, you would have gone through the spiritual growth of like, okay, I see what I'm doing. I'm making myself anxious. I'm thinking about it. I'm worrying about it. I can't do it. I got to do this. I got to do this. It's like literally, it's a course in Buddhism with a pair of sticks in your.
Yeah.
If you treat making music as like a sacred act, devoid of the religious connotations of that, it's the most beautiful environment to explore being fully human and just heal as a person and bring joy, because that's one of the greatest benefits. Like Tony Craddock calls it the goosebumps. I love that because we play, and when you play the music slamming, you get goosebumps. You get this feeling. Nothing in my life has ever felt like.
Yeah. I remember when I was in a like heavy metal rock band in 1998, we opened up for Creed and we were the first of three bands. We started, first song was great, second song, even better, third song, our lead singer said, "So how are we doing?" And everybody went, and you know that feeling of the crowd.
Yeah.
And then we started the fourth song, there was a mosh pit. By the end, I threw my sticks out in the audience. People were grabbing them like I was a rock star. I'm signing autographs. Of course, the next day I had to get up and go to my day job. Right. But the feeling that we get, even when I'm playing in club day bands, you know, you see people dancing and
Yeah.
you're just making music with people that if you like the people that you're working with, you get to make people dance and clap and smile and share your joy of playing your instrument and making them happy. And it really does. It is a metaphysical thing. And I didn't mind playing Memphis the Musical over and over again. I didn't mind playing Lady Day over and over again. I didn't mind playing Ain't Too Proud over and over again. I wouldn't mind doing that. If, of course, if the people that you're working with are great
Yeah.
and the music is great. Of course,
Yeah.
it's different when you can't stand the music or, it's not really your thing. But yeah, having this kind of career can be a wonderful thing. And the touring thing, I started out with a bus and truck tour in the year 2000, and I was really young. I was with a bunch of people that were even younger than me. I think I was like 34, and they were all like 24. I'm like, oh man, they didn't understand. We're driving down through the Southwest and seeing the mesas and the four corners of Utah. Yeah. I was like, do you guys know where we are? They're like, oh, I got to go back to bed. I'm like, you guys are missing out and seeing the world. It's just fantastic seeing the United States. I'm sorry for going off on a tangent, but it all has to do with being on tour, which you are a master of, which you should read about his experiences in this book,
That's
Show
right.
Drumming, An Expert's Guide to Theater and Touring, which I'm so glad I got. If there's one piece of advice that you would say that somebody could take away from this book, what would it be?
Yeah. The biggest piece of advice would be know your why. Like, know why you want to do what you want to do with your playing. Make sure it comes from a genuine place. If you want to have a career as a musician, to be great, to make a lot of money, to have all the trappings of success as defined by the current social zeitgeist, you're going to be disappointed. If you play from a love of music, you'll never be disappointed. It can be hard to maintain that love in the face of adversity. It's like records. Nobody pays for music anymore, right? How do we finance making creative projects when everybody believes music should be free? Everything turns into a vanity project. You pay X number of dollars, you put your product out, nobody ever buys it. I can't even get the guys in a band to buy my records. I'm a funny girl. It's just like, okay, that paradigm is gone. But the love of playing is always there. And that satisfaction that you talk about, I love that I think about the theater as my office, right? I get these beautiful cathedrals built in like the 1920s to celebrate the beauty of entertainment. Architecture is unbelievable. All this stuff, all these people, this is their special night out, somebody's birthday and anniversary. They love this show. They want to come play. The end of the night, people are smiling. I've brought them joy. I'm like, there is no more noble calling in life than that. And that's the return that I get to bring people joy in their life. I get to give them meaning. And that gives me goosebumps. That's that sense of satisfaction. So I write about that in the book. Like, your motivation for why you do things is really important. If you're driven to become successful or famous, look at what's driving and be careful of the traps that those drives set up if they're not yours. If you're living your parents' dreams, that's a trap. If you're living these false dreams of like, if I become famous and rich, all my problems will be solved. Nah, there's a couple of people who are, you can see they've got all the money in the world, but there's an emptiness in there that ain't never going to be filled. So don't think that money, success, any of those things is going to make you feel any different. It's going to provide different opportunities, but it's not going to do what you want. So, why you do what you do, intent, right? It's just right out of Carlos Castaneda and all those metaphysical books. Intent, like what's your intent? Like that's one of the most motivating, most important things. And the other thing I want to just close with is I managed to do pretty much everything I ever dreamed about doing in the music business. I really wanted to play with Pat Metheny. Pat never called me. but I played with a jazz guitarist who came out of Metheny. We played together for 6 years. We made 3 records. And I feel some of the music we played is as heavy as anything I would listen to on, the Metheny trio. I know you're not supposed to say that, but it was like one guy playing 3 instruments. I'm still releasing that stuff. My friend Scott Sherwood, he passed in 2009. I'm still putting out records that we made as myself, Mike Nuno, and Scott Sherwood. I'm putting out my fusion band records. I'm putting out jazz trio records. I'm putting out percussion records. I'm putting out solo timpani records. I've had a life playing Broadway shows, never going to New York. I found a way to have a career where I have a pension so that, 6 years from now when I can collect, I actually have a retirement fund. I know pilots who had their pensions taken away by airlines. I'm like, I got a pension and they don't. They did everything they were supposed to do. So I feel like I have maneuvered through society and managed to have a thing. I have a great relationship with my wife. I have a lot of friends that if bad things happen, I can call them up and count on them. Like I just feel so fortunate to have had this experience. I was watching the Steve Gadd interview the other day, and Gadd was just talking about how fortunate he felt to be where he was when he was. And I was like, yeah, I feel a similar way, even though my world, I wanted to be in Steve Gadd's world, but by the time I got to that world, it wasn't there anymore. It wasn't like I was going to bump Steve off, like, hey man, let's play. This guy's great. Yeah, let's forget about Steve. And so I feel very, very fortunate. So I hope that optimism and stuff is inside the book, because there's a lot of honest stories about missteps, because I want you guys to learn from mistakes that I made. And that's a lot of the honesty in this podcast. Like talk about what happened on Cats and learn these lessons, take it from the old guy so you don't have to go through the experience. Learn from your elders, just the way music is supposed to work. Dude, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been an honor to join the pantheon of drumming legends and to just have a time to chat with you about things that are really, really important. So thank you, my friend.
Where can people find you?
You can find me. My website is h-man-band-studios.com. Just do Paul Hanna on the omniscient Google world-eating search engine. You'll find me. I'm all over social media. I'd stay away from social media until I found out you got to have social media numbers to sell records. Oh, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, YouTube. I got a bunch of great videos on YouTube. A lot of stuff on touring. A lot of stuff on touring disasters, like my video monitor going out. I got some creative stuff, arrangement of Teen Town I wrote for my great friend John Toney, and Aaron Hike is playing on it. It's just great. So you can find me all over the interwebs. Thanks, Al Gore. And please, if you got any questions, reach out, contact me. I love to talk to people. I love to help people out, but don't hustle me for gigs because I got no power.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Paul Hanna, thank you very much, and we will talk soon.
Okay, take care, man. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.